There's a book that came out about 10 years ago by an Australian nurse. So she treated a lot of patients at the end of their lives. And she wrote a book about their biggest regrets at the end of their lives. And she found that there were a lot of themes in common with these patients. A lot of them, I think some of the biggest regrets were, I regret not allowing myself to be happier, not being able to live a life true to myself. And then another major regret was I regret working so hard. Life is really short and, you never know what's around the corner.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to 北腔南调, aka Cultural Collision. I'm Melody.
I'm Victoria.
And today we have an exciting guest with us to share her experience taking a sabbatical to travel, spend quality time with friends and family, and make time to self-development the last half year after spending almost 3 years in China nonstop due to COVID restrictions. Many people often wait until they retire to travel the world, but we've seen more and more people live their life and enjoy it throughout, rather than segmenting each of their life periods to just be school, work, family, and then see the world. Nandini is originally from London and has lived in Beijing for a total of 8 years. During her time in China, she has worked for governmental organizations and also in media. Outside of her full-time work, Nandini was an active volunteer for 2 communities, Beijing Women's Network, where she was a member of its committee, led its Applied Skills series, also for Hayrunning, where she volunteered as a coach. Welcome, Nandini.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, Melody and Victoria. Yeah, so it's great to be on the show. And for me, it's a bit of a new experience being the one who answers the questions. I'm used to asking the questions. For example, at BWN, when we used to do a lot of events with guest speakers. So yes, please excuse me if I sound a bit nervous or weird. It's a new experience for me.
No, you're going to be great. So Nandini, do you mind giving us a self-introduction first?
Yeah, I think you summed everything up, Melody. So I can tell you my name is Nandini Venkata. I'm 34 years old. Right now, I'm based in Vienna, which is the capital city of Austria. And as you mentioned, I spent a lot of my adult life living in Beijing, including the past 3 years where I worked for a private media organization. I produced podcasts for them on China's financial, business, and economic news. But of course, as we're going to be discussing today, last year, I, together with my husband, decided to leave China, quit my job, and take a roughly half a year career break. So to travel and to catch up with loved ones who I hadn't been able to see during the COVID pandemic.
That's super exciting. And we're super excited to have you on our show today to talk about your journey traveling this past half year. So we talked a little bit about it earlier, like COVID might have been really overwhelming and you and Christian were stuck in China for really 3 years. But what ultimately inspired both of you to take a sabbatical and travel for 7 months?
Yeah, so I think we always wanted to do something like this. And I think during my 20s, I had, of course, wanted to do something like this, but the circumstances weren't right. I didn't have the financial resources, or I didn't have, enough time. I was too busy, maybe with university or work. Christian and I, we had always thought that when the time would come that we would eventually leave China to do this. Because when else in our lives would we find ourselves in a position where both of us would have left our jobs and we both wouldn't be renting an apartment and we'd both, be in a transition phase. So, what was the rush to immediately, find new work and a new apartment? And I think on this note, on this point, I should really stress that we were also really lucky that this time around, the circumstances were right for us. We were really lucky, to be able to afford to do this and, not have responsibilities, such as taking care of kids or having to take care of a loved one back home. So we, had the time and the money to be able to do this.
Can you share with us which countries you have visited in the last 7 months and which place impressed you the most?
Yeah, so this is a really difficult question because I've visited a lot of really amazing places and I find it really difficult for one to stand out. So just going through the list of places, first of all, I didn't travel constantly for the 7 months. So we came back in autumn and then we used Vienna as a sort of base. And the first 2 months, we did some trips around Europe and met up with old friends. So we went to Switzerland, Germany, the UK, where my family are, and then Malta, Italy. And we also went across the Mediterranean to Israel. Then we set off on a 1 month trip to Central America, where we visited Panama, Costa Rica, Guatemala, and Mexico City. After that, we came back for the holidays because we wanted to spend them with friends and family in Europe. And then in late January, we set up for another long trip for about 2.5 months, where we went across Southeast Asia, Thailand, Cambodia, Malaysia, Bali, and we also went to Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Japan. So, yes, it was a lot of stuff. I mean, you asked which place impressed me the most. As I said earlier, it's really hard for me to pick out one place, but I think there were some experiences that were really special, especially because in a lot of these destinations, we actually met up with friends. I'm sure, as you both will know, having lived in Beijing, it's such an international city that you meet people from all over the world. So when they leave Beijing, eventually you have friends living in all corners of the earth. So we were really lucky. For example, in Cambodia, we met up with a friend, Mira, and we ran a cross-country race with her through the Cambodian countryside by Angkor Wat. So it was just outside of Angkor Wat. You run past some distant ruins that I think as a tourist we would never see. We would probably just go to the main sites. And it was really spectacular. We ran through farmland. You had cows in the fields, all the little kids like from the neighborhood, a lot of them came out and they wanted to high five the runners. So it was like this really surreal, amazing experience. Well, and then in terms of nature and, seeing wildlife, I think the places that really impressed me were Costa Rica. In Borneo, we went to the Malaysian part of Borneo and you just see incredible animals. In Costa Rica, you can see sloths, the red macaw parrots, even snakes and super deadly little colorful frogs that look very cute, but you shouldn't play with them because they are super deadly. But you just see them like all around. You don't even have to go to a nature park. And in Malaysia, we visited a rehabilitation center for orangutans. So they're not kept in cages. It's basically just on the edge of a forest, and the orangutans can come from the forest to the center. And I was kind of just hypnotized watching these incredible creatures who seem so similar to us. We went actually 3 times to the center to see them because if you get the tickets, I think it's still valid for a day and a half or so. And it was just like amazing watching these creatures that are so similar to us. Yeah. So those are some highlights.
That's amazing. As you were explaining everything and talking about all the places you went to, I can just visually see it in my head. It kind of feels like I'm watching a documentary. I'm sure a lot of our listeners are interested, having traveled for 7 months, leaving work behind. How did you guys manage your finances during your travels?
Yeah, so I think that's like the really big elephant in the room. And I'm sure many people who are listening would be wondering about this. So, as I said, for us, this was something that we wanted to do for a really long time. So, we had been saving for it. It was also something that we prioritized over, I don't know, acquiring other material possessions or other experiences. I know for some people, their big goal, if they save up, it's maybe to treat themselves to, I don't know, a fancy car or a watch or even, like a lavish wedding. I heard actually recently that in 2023, it's predicted that most weddings in the US, or on average, weddings in the US, they're expected to reach around $29,000. So for us, those things were never something that we wanted. I think we wanted to give ourselves the freedom to be able to take this experience. to travel. So we prioritize that over other things. And then, of course, the other big thing is to budget. We spent most of our time in countries where things were more affordable. For example, in Southeast Asia and in Central America, prices to stay in hotels, they're quite affordable, or, to do experiences there and so on. And when we did visit places that are more expensive, such as Hong Kong or Switzerland, then we stayed with friends. We were really lucky to have friends who were able to host us. I think it really makes a difference, just like your lifestyle when you're traveling. Like if you want to be in super fancy places, if you want to eat out of fancy restaurants but I mean, having said all of that, I think it's really important to recognize that being able to take time off from work and do something as indulgent as traveling is a huge privilege. And I'm very aware that for many people, they can't afford to do it or the circumstances aren't right. So yeah, we're very aware that we were really lucky to have this privilege.
Yeah, I think you're also like you're very lucky with your husband have the same goal and plan, like, right? He's in this with you together to plan this whole trip, and he is willing to control the budget and go to the countries you both want to go. How did your experiences during your sabbatical change or shape your perspective of life and work? Because I feel like after we experience something, it changed our life. So I don't know, what do you think about it?
I don't know how it really changed my life in the long term, but I think that I definitely did learn some things from it, or, it made me reflect on a lot of things. I thought, for example, taking this risk to take a break from work and have this big gap on your CV, a lot of people may think this is quite scary to do, or it's quite like unwise, not a sensible thing to do. But the more I enjoyed the experience, I also thought that there's a risk that comes from not doing, those things you want to do in life. So there's the cost of risking too much, but there's also a cost of risking too little. You two probably also in your lives, maybe you've made some decisions that felt risky, but then in the end, you were really happy that you maybe went with your gut. There's a book that came out about 10 years ago by an Australian nurse. So she treated a lot of patients at the end of their lives, and she wrote a book about their biggest regrets at the end of their lives. And she found that there were a lot of themes in common with these patients. A lot of them, I think some of the biggest regrets were, I regret not allowing myself to be happier. I regret not being able to live a life true to myself. And then another major regret was I regret working so hard. Those things, it kind of made me think also like, life is really short. And, you never know what's around the corner. So I know in the introduction, Melody, you said that a lot of people wait to retirement to go travel or to take a break. And, as it sounds very morbid, but like we don't know if all of us will, make it to that age. And maybe when that happens, also, we don't know like how our lives will be. Will we be physical fit to go climb, maybe go on that hike that we wanted to do back in our 20s or 30s, or will we have family obligations? So I'm kind of a big believer, if you don't do something now, then when will you do it? So if you have the opportunity and the circumstances feel right, then yeah, I don't know. I think I personally would like to try to go for it, because I think I don't want to miss the opportunity.
But I think that's such great advice, and it makes so much sense. Like if we're in our 20s, 30s, or 40s, we're definitely going to be in a much better physical shape than we would be if we were in our 60s or 70s when we quote unquote retire. So yeah, I think it's amazing that so many people do have the opportunity to travel now. There's so many different like living places, right? Like you can couch surf, you can stay at friends' homes, you can go to hostels, you can eat street food in a lot of places too, or you can eat at 7-Eleven. Convenience stores have such great food, at least in Asia.
Life in Japan.
Yeah.
It's so expensive, but the 7-Elevens there are amazing. So Yeah. I mean, when I was in my early 20s, I wanted to travel also. So I did do it on an extreme budget. And I mean, I think there are also like downsides to it. Like you can be putting yourself in a more risky situation. So I couch surfed by myself. And sometimes, like looking back, I think like if I had a daughter, I wouldn't want her to couch surf alone, just because you don't know maybe who the guys are. Of course, it's up to the individual. And I also hitchhiked, which is like nuts. I wouldn't advise that hitchhiking, at least by yourself. Like if you are a girl, go with a male companion who you trust and is very responsible.
So, speaking of potential dangers, did you guys face any challenges during your travels and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, I think like if you have any health issues, that's of course a huge challenge when you're traveling because it definitely kills the travel vibe. So my takeaway from this is always, always, always have travel insurance because maybe you think you're only going to get injured doing some exciting big activities like, I don't know, jumping out of a plane or hiking. But it's like the everyday things can also get in the way. And to be stuck abroad with some health issue, it can be very painful, physically painful and financially painful. And then another like challenge we had looking back on it now, it's kind of funny. We did a hike with a tour company in Costa Rica to go close to a volcano. So you hike up a mountain and then you have this view of a beautiful view of a volcano. And then afterwards, you go to a nearby hot spring. And it turned out to be just like a big scam. Like actually, our tour guide, he was supposed to like, be able to explain like all the stuff about the nature and so on in the forest. So he was like showing us a tree and he's like, this tree is really special. And we were like, why? Because it can be made into a chair. And then we'd be like, okay. And then he showed us another tree. This tree is really special. Why? It can be made into a door. When we reached the top of this mountain and we had to hike down, it started pouring with rain and it got dark. And he didn't have a flashlight. And he was just running down the mountain, and we were trying our best to follow him. And he told us that, okay, we're hiking down the snake route down. So be careful because there's snakes where your feet are, and there are also snakes where your shoulders are. So just don't touch anything and you'll be fine. So I was like, okay, I'm in the dark. It's raining. Maybe a thunderstorm is coming. There are poisonous snakes all around me. What did I sign up for? Yeah. And I mean, it kind of continued all the way down. This whole experience continued being really weird. We ended up saying, okay, like we don't need to go to the hot springs because it's pouring with rain. We'll just go back. Then we found out that the transport that they were supposed to pick us up with, he couldn't even get in touch with them. He told us this after 40 minutes of waiting by the road. So then in the end, my husband just spoke to a random guy who was very nice on the side of the road. And they offered to carry us with our guide back to the city in the back of their van. We had to like sit on some boxes. And we were like, okay, I think we have been scammed. And we looked up the company later and we found out that they had actually been running all sorts of shady scams, like much worse than what we experienced. Like, for example, when people paid with credit cards, they were taking a note of their numbers and then kept charging them for months. Or they also had a hostel. And when you would go out, they would go into your room and steal stuff from you. So my takeaway from this is always do your research online before you book an experience, some touristic activity, because you want to make sure that the people who are taking you there are legit because you are putting yourself in their hands.
I'm glad you guys are back safe though.
Yeah, we made it back very safe. I mean, I think just one other thing, I mean, I think those are quite practical challenges. But I think another thing that if you're traveling with someone else that can be challenging is maybe you're just not used to spending so much time together, and then it can get a bit tense, or you can just maybe start to feel like your social battery is getting drained and you need time for yourself, which is very normal. So for example, I think quite early on into taking this career break, I was with my husband, like, in Tel Aviv, walking by the beach. And I was just like to him, like, I'm not used to spending so much time with you. I find it strange. I find it a little overwhelming because I was used in Beijing to going to the office, doing my job for a certain number of hours every day. Then maybe I would have, the BWN things to do that he's not a part of. I was used to having my separate things to do. And then when you're suddenly 24/7 together the whole time, it's something to adapt to. How I learned to deal with it is just that you have to be good at communicating, also making time for yourselves. Sometimes when you're traveling somewhere, you both have different things you want to see, and I think it's perfectly fine if you go off and do your own thing for half a day or whatever, and then you can meet up. So space is healthy.
Totally. One other thing is in our, like, when we travel is to meet interesting people, right? And make new friends. So did you meet any interesting people during your travels and that made a significant impact on you?
Well, throughout the trip, we met up with many old friends, and a lot of them were people who had lived previously in Beijing. So I think it was really great to see how they had moved on. They had carved new lives for themselves. And that was really inspiring because I think Beijing is such a fun place. And for me, it can feel like the center of the universe because there's so much going on. The capital city of China, the world's second largest economy, it's just like, it can feel like it's this booming place. But then it's really good to see, like, okay, other people have moved on. They're really happy where they are. One friend we met up with, her name is Joy, and she also left China very recently in summer last year. And she invited us to stay on a boat with her in Panama. And this boat belongs to her old music teacher, a lady called Susan, who I found really is inspiring. So Susan is in her early 80s, I believe. It made me think about how we were talking early in our conversation about how, maybe when you reach retirement, you're not well enough to go on, your big adventure. So she was actually one of those people who did have, at least in my eyes, the biggest adventure of her life after retirement. So when she was 62, she bought this boat. It was actually made in Taiwan, and she lived on that boat. I think for her, it made more sense to be living in a beautiful place, near the Caribbean Sea. And she also realized maybe that her pension money would go much further in Panama. And she had a group of friends who are like other retirees also living on boats, and they're from all over the world. So she has, this big social community. They play, board games together in the evening, and they're also super, physically active. To be able to like manage a boat by herself, it takes a lot of physical work. We were going to sail from one part of Panama to the other. So there was something in the back of the boat that wasn't working, and she jumped into the water by herself with like a snorkel, and she was just down in the water for 20 minutes fixing it. I wouldn't know how to stay underwater for so long and, stay active without coming up for air. But, she was able to do it. And I found it really inspiring because she shows that if you are determined and you take the steps, you can have this big adventure at any stage in your life. And she does it all by herself. So it's really impressive because she's actually the captain of the boat. So by herself, she has sailed, all over the world. She sailed to the Galapagos Islands, all the way down, I think maybe even near Argentina, around the Caribbean, so to Hawaii. So super, super inspiring, strong lady.
Wow. Sailing is not an easy sport. I think
No,
it's like one of the most challenging sports ever. It's truly physical as well as mental strength in order to deal with all of the different variants when you're in the sea. So that's super impressive and cool that you guys got to experience that. Our interview is winding down, coming to an end, and we always ask our guests 3 questions and twist them a little bit based off of the topic that we are discussing of the day. So our first one is, would you recommend taking a sabbatical to travel to others, and why?
Well, So actually, I don't think I'm really qualified to tell people how they should live their lives because I think it's a very personal choice. If you take a break, a career break, it doesn't have to be to travel and it doesn't have to be for half a year. Maybe some people, they just need, like, they just want to take 1 or 2 months out to focus on themselves, maybe to study something on the side or to work on some self-development. So I think there's not one specific way to do it. But yeah, if it's something that you want to do, I really do hope that you find a way.
So, what's the most rewarding part of your sabbatical experience?
Yeah, so I think what me and my husband found is definitely the most rewarding part was being able to meet up with, people who are important to us, a lot of friends. So even though, it's amazing to be on the beach in Bali or I don't know, drink a margarita in Mexico City, I think for us, the times then we were most excited and happiest was when those few minutes before we get to meet with a friend and we know that they're going to walk through the door at the airport, or we're going to be able to catch up with them and give them a big hug after so many years. This was really the most important thing, and I think you never regret spending time with people who are important to you.
Yeah, and I'm so grateful that you reached out to me when you were in Taiwan,
Yeah.
and it was really nice to be able to meet up for a little bit in the afternoon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm really, really happy we got to meet. This is actually one of the other big regrets that people have at the end of their lives is losing touch with friends. So I think it does take effort. I mean, you don't have to maybe physically see them, but still keeping in touch is really important.
So what's next, Nandini? How do you plan to transition back to work if you want to go back to work after your sabbatical?
Yeah, so that's a really, really good question to end this on. So right now I'm in the job hunting phase. My plan is just to be like very proactive with job hunting, go to networking events, reach out to people. I signed up for a job fair. So just, put yourself out there, get a feel of the opportunities that are going on. I also think you can't do job hunting the whole day. So it's important to also take a break in between and have some balance. Some people are also wondering about like how recruiters will feel about the gap on your CV. And this is definitely something that I was thinking about, before I took the decision to take the break. But I spoke to a good friend of mine who she took I think like a year and a half break, not because she wanted to travel, but it was actually because she had been working in a really intense industry where she was working like maybe 14-hour days and she just essentially got burnt out. During that break, she decided to try and launch her own business, but it was to do with travel and then COVID hit. So she just freelanced in that time. And she told me that when she goes to job interviews and she's asked about it, like the gap, she says that she wanted to take a break to try and do her own business. She thought it was kind of like a now or never kind of thing. She can show them examples of the work that she was doing and also examples of the freelance work. And she said that there's some people who will be like, oh no, like I like the standard CV where there's no gap and everything has to be a certain way, the uniform normal way. But then there will be some people who will appreciate that, you wanted to stand out a bit. You believed in, doing something also for yourself. And maybe they also are people who are like, yeah, I also like a balance in my life. Like career is important, but it's not everything. And those are probably the people who you would like to work for. So yes, we'll see. To be continued.
Well, best of luck with everything going forward,
Thank you.
Nandini. Thanks so much for joining us today. It was wonderful hearing about your travel experiences from the past half year, being able to see you a couple months ago when you also visited Taiwan, and just a joy to be able to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Melody and Victoria. It was great to be on the show.
Well, to all our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to our episode today. Stay tuned on Wednesdays for more episodes, and we'll chat soon. Bye.
Bye.